Good evening and welcome to NDTV and a happy new year to all our viewers. Now, as we step into the first day of the new year, a time when resolutions are made and priorities are set, we turn our focus to an issue that affects us all, global warming. Tonight, we bring you a critical discussion on this challenge that impacts every individual worldwide. On your screens right now, you are witnessing the tangible effects of global warming experienced by India and the world. If we see some of these visuals which we have in fact taken, not just from our country, but from across the world, whether it's Europe or the US or South America, from the devastating floods in Chennai and Uttarakhand to the scorching heat waves in Europe. Some of these images compel us to confront the urgency. In fact, we cannot look away from these images without feeling that there needs to be urgent measures taken, action taken to mitigate the escalating temperatures. And tonight we will delve into a conversation about India's role in addressing this pressing issue, the unique initiatives that India has undertaken, and the path forward. Joining me to discuss these crucial aspects are, at the moment, I have Mr. Harjeet Singh, Head of Global Political Strategy at Climate Action Network International, who's joining me in the studios of NDTV tonight. I'll also be joined by Professor Anjal Prakash, Associate Professor and Research Director, Bharati Institute of Public Policy, Indian School of Business, Ms. Ulka Kelkar, Executive Director, Climate WRI India, and Aarti Khosla, who's the Director of Climate Trends. But first, before I go on to my first guest, let's take a look at what are some of the issues that we are looking at specifically as far as India's role is concerned vis-a-vis other developed nations who are also tackling the same crisis. Now, the world is at a crossroads, with some experts suggesting that we might have reached a point of no return. However, amidst this uncertainty, India has in fact stood out for its commitment to combating the climate change. Mr. Harjeet Singh, if I can bring you in here first. Now, despite its share of challenges, neutral observers are in fact saying that India has taken a leading role in addressing the climate crisis. And there are several reports which indicate that India actually contributes more to climate-related finance through development banks and other means than many developed countries. In fact, India has also provided around $765 million in solidarity with other developing countries for climate finance, demonstrating a commitment that goes beyond its responsibilities as a developing nation. Now, would you agree with this and further shed some light for our viewers as to whether India is best poised to be the top global leader in fighting climate change?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. And there's no doubt that India's leadership has been lauded at the international level. In fact, there was a recent report by German Watch called Climate Change Performance Index, where it rated India as at 7th position, and which has an improvement compared to the last year, because India, the way it has invested in reducing its emissions, but also making sure that its renewable energy investments are going up massively, and the target of having 50% of its energy coming from non-fossil fuel sources is a massive leap that India has committed to. And in terms of its own investments, domestically, more than 80% of green finance is domestic, coming from its own sources, private sector. At the same time, the international community has not provided as much support. So India has taken a huge step in terms of reducing its emissions and also committing to a massive target. Where India needs to do a lot more is now tackling climate change impacts, which are increasing, as you just showed on your screen.
Right. If I can bring in Professor Anjal Prakash, who's joined us on the discussion right now on this very aspect. What do you think can be done to make developed nations more accountable and to be brought to book? Because India is, of course, being lauded globally for the role that it has taken, and we will actually get into further details of what all India has already committed to and done. But why is it that we as a developing nation are taking on more share of the burden, and what can be done in order to change that?
That's a very good question, because this has been a perennial problems that countries like India and other countries of the global south has been experiencing. that the industrialization, the one who has actually polluted the planet Earth for all these years, and today's climate change actually is totally attributed to those nations who have polluted us. And that has led to kind of huge problems in the global south. You have seen that the kind of devastation that we are facing day in and day out in all the countries in the global south, and without much of the resilience that we have, we need to direct our development finance to combating climate change. So that's the inequity level that we've seen it. Now, the question that you asked is interesting because it is very difficult because it's a power play. I, being in the IPCC group, I know what it means. Because science can only take you so far, and there's a huge number of politics that is involved. These are politics of representation, the politics of power that you bring in, and also politics in the way in which you are argumenting your case that we have. The way in which it is organized, that the global north, the scientists, the global north, the politicians, and the negotiators, the global north, actually get together on many aspects and then try to pull us down, and that's where we need to galvanize. I think India has poised a very great leadership role now, which was actually lacking in the global south voice, and we are very critical in some of the negotiation, and rightly so, because attack is the best defense, and I see that is coming out from India. So just to conclude this, I think we need to organize. We need to also put up the data. We need to also show scientifically how this has been disbenefited. What is the inequity that we are seeing at the global level? All this will actually help us for the argument in our favor.
Right. Mr. Harjeet Singh, if I can bring you in on this very aspect as well, do you think, because India is positioning itself as the top leader in the global south, in that umbrella as well, and as far as that is concerned, the fact that the Prime Minister also proposed that maybe the next COP could be held in India as well. Considering all this, do we need to leverage more of our negotiation power in order to bring developed nations to the book as far as tackling climate change is concerned?
Well, there is no doubt, and especially the way it successfully conducted G20, it made its intention very clear that it's going to represent the views of the global south, and it has done so successfully also in the climate conversations, and especially highlighting the inequity that exists and how rich countries are responsible and developing countries must be supported with more finance coming from rich countries. So those demands India has been highlighting for a very long time, and also recently putting a spotlight on how rich countries have been failing in providing finance and even meeting their own targets. So that way India does represent the interest of global south nations, and India has also a lot of potential to support these developing countries also in tackling climate change impacts, because the kind of capacity that we have in terms of our technical know-how in dealing with disasters, that can be another support mechanism that India can provide to developing countries and demonstrate its leadership.
Right. In fact, despite all the problems that and all the challenges that India might have, they are actually, in a way, if we look at it, committing more and definitely pledging more in terms of action, where we've seen probably some developed countries actually hesitating. We'll hold on to that and come back to it probably to discuss it further. But these are some of the international commitments and international pledges that we were talking about so far as the global arena is concerned, at what India has in fact committed to so far. But let's also talk about some of the unique initiatives that India is taking. In the country itself, we've seen them actually coming up with several unique initiatives in 2023 alone. And this probably paves the way forward we can look forward to more such action in 2024. But let's just take our viewers quickly through some of the aspects that we are looking at. For example, the Global Green Credit Initiative, the National Green Hydrogen Mission, Mission Life, which is actually aiming at changing lifestyle, especially targeting the youth, for better environment, and including more green reforms and promising more green jobs in the last budget. And also the Alliance to Save Big Cats. These are some of the initiatives, unique initiatives that India has taken in order to become a champion to fight climate change and to reduce global warming. But coming to you, Ulka Kelkar, in fact, in both this, if we just look at some of these initiatives that India has taken, both in terms of the Green Credit Initiative and Mission Life, they seem to be done with an eye on a planet that is adapting to tackle the climate change challenge. It's not just India alone. So would you call these actually visionary initiatives and something that even the world can take forward from India, where India is in fact starting these initiatives, but these are actually changes that are setting precedents for the world?
What is very interesting is that these are two very different types of initiatives that you mentioned. One of them, like the tripling renewable energy target, is an example of what's called a regulatory initiative. The government sets a target, sets a mandate. The Green Creditive Initiative is a market-based mechanism. So it's actually something that brings different strata of society, industry, schools, hospitals, many different types of agencies can be involved, and they're incentivized. And the third that you spoke about, the Mission Life, that is an example of citizen-led change. So it's about lifestyle change, behavior change that can be led by consumers in the way they decide to purchase certain things or the way they decide to use certain types of transport. So it's actually an entire range of different types of policy instruments that are being used. And it actually goes to show that the scale of the challenge is such that you will require all these different types of approaches. Any one approach is not a magic silver bullet that will solve the problem of climate change, and all sectors of society, all sectors of the economy will have to be involved. I think one data point that I'd like to cite from the very recent third national communication that the government of India submitted to the UNFCCC is that even though our emissions have doubled between 2005 and 2019, the GHG intensity of GDP has actually improved faster than what was originally anticipated. So already there's a 33% improvement in 2019 compared to 2005, as cited in this third national communication. So what this means is that even though we are a developing economy, our development is something that is happening in a cleaner way because we are making conscious efforts to switch to cleaner technologies, clean energy. Also, we are having more of the services sector, and also because there is more energy efficiency coming into the system. So just like in the G20, there was a target of tripling of renewable energy, there was also a target that was collectively adopted by the G20 countries that they would double the rate of energy efficiency improvement. So I would say that there's a whole range of options, and basically it is showing the way for many other types of countries to follow.
Right, Ulka, I mean, staying with you, actually, I also wanted to bring in the point that, for example, some of these initiatives like Mission Life is looking at behavioral changes, especially targeting the youth. And even if we look at this other aspect of promising more green jobs in the last budget, these are specifically looking at, the younger population in our country. Do you think these are some of the aspects that, targeting the youth will actually prove to be the biggest challenges? Because, of course, keeping in mind that these are processes which have been started, it will take, of course, a long period of time before we can actually see some sort of a results. But for, the government actually to bring in these things just before its term is ending, do you think these are some of the aspects that would actually appeal to the youth and they would want to be part of the process to make this change happen as well?
When we talk about the kinds of timescales over which climate change is experienced and the timescales over which climate action needs to be taken, there is no alternative but for the youth to get involved and actually lead the way. So when India has a target of becoming net zero by 2070, or as the IPCC tells us that the world economy needs to become net zero by the middle of the century, well, then it is the youth of today who really have to lead the charge. But I'll give a few examples of why this is so important. The nature of jobs is also changing. I think more and more there is a greater and greater reliance on MSMEs, on micro, small and medium enterprises. And there's a need for skilling so that workers who are going into these enterprises are equipped with the green skills needed to use new kinds of technologies, new kinds of fuels. Startups are also included in this, and Startup 20 was a very active part of India's G20 presidency. But what's important over here is that these new green skills are also imparted to women, and young women are also able to access these new green jobs. The second example I would give is that of transport. I mean, the youth of today can choose to use private transport, maybe more electric two-wheelers, and that might be one way to go. But wouldn't it be even better if they were to choose to use more public transport, electric buses or the metro or trains? So I think that is something that becomes as much of a lifestyle choice as it becomes, a market-based incentive. And the third thing I would say is that a lot of India's youth still resides in villages. They are having to seek job opportunities elsewhere, perhaps in other cities. But one of the initiatives that the government of India has domestically is awards for carbon neutral panchayats or energy independent panchayats. And it's really a very holistic form of development whereby at the panchayat level, the villages may choose to have more renewable energy. They may choose to manage their solid waste and wastewater in a better way. And they may also choose to have, for example, more regenerative agriculture or planting of trees in a way that also enriches the soil carbon. So I think at various levels, youth can take the lead, but also in a way that it creates new livelihood opportunities for them.
Right. Very interesting point, Ulka, that you raised that, of course, we are looking at sometimes the urban landscape, but also in rural areas, how the government has actually started certain initiatives so that these changes actually percolate down to every strata of society. And some states, of course, have taken the lead in terms of actually bringing in more renewable energy resources, availability. But then we, of course, as we said, that these are some initiatives which we are looking at, which have been started in 2023 itself, which in a way is paving the way forward for more such unique initiatives that the government is looking at. But having said all of this, and of course also considering the fact that globally India has been lauded for the role that it's played so far in terms of tackling global warming, but we also are very aware of the fact that India is a country with around 1.4 billion population. There are several challenges that the government actually faces, that the country faces as a whole when it comes to make some of our aspirations, some of our green ambitions a reality. Now, if we just quickly put up that challenges graphics rather, that we have put together to have an overarching understanding of some of the challenges that lie ahead in India's climate fight. As I said, first of all, of course, the population size, then reducing emissions is a big challenge in itself. There are multiple emissions that we're looking at, not just vehicular emissions, but cooling emissions as well. Then there's, of course, the dependence on fossil fuels. India is still dependent largely on coal plants, for that matter, as one of the forms of energy. And of course, deforestation and single-use plastics. These are some of the challenges that we feel that are lying ahead in terms of fulfilling our climate fight, fulfilling the ambitions and aspirations that we have in order to make our fight in this fight to actually reduce global warming even further. But Aarti Khosla, bringing you in at this point, can India advance its target of net zero emissions? Because that is something which, as I was reading up, that a lot of people have actually said that maybe 2070 is a far too late date. Maybe we should look at a date which is much further closer to achieving than setting a date like 2070 for the Indian government. Or is this a realistic target that the government has put up in order to actually fulfill the target that it set out to achieve?
Thanks for having me on your show. And I think I'll try and answer this differently. It's not just about having a year which is set a couple of decades out from now, but it is more at looking at what is possible to do now and within this decade, so that you set yourself on a path which is well before 2070. And I think that's where a lot of what the other speakers have said and you have alluded to are things that are important. Are we able to curtail our emissions, and are we able to create a position for ourselves within the way the global geopolitics is shaping up, where we don't lose the right to development as we get more and more obliged or obligated to undertake climate action? Because I think it's quite clear that India has announced itself as the country with the highest population. The kind of targets that are out there are not easy to meet. the contributions from GDP that come from even the medium and small industries is something like 30-35%. There is huge dependence on the medium and small scale enterprises. Are we looking at making them clean? We've set electric vehicle targets for ourselves. Are we making sure that we are accelerating on those targets and we can achieve them well within the 2030 limit, so that within 7 to 8 years, we look like we are in a better position to advance our 2070 targets? Because other than that, 2070 seems it's pretty far out there. It's a rough calculation that India made about 2 years back in Glasgow when everybody signed what was known as the net zero commitment. And that's a very good buzzword, and well, maybe so. But the reality is that the devil lies in the details, and the devil lies in the details of what's being done at the moment and within this decade. And I think that is what is important. If you look at other countries, there are mid-century targets for a lot of the developed countries, the entire West, the US, Europe. Everybody has a 2050 target. China has a 2060 target. And subsequently, in that same spirit of reasoning, India has a 2070 target. I think the fact of the matter is that climate and climate change is a really wicked problem. More and more, as the impacts will increase, India will have large millions of vulnerable population and citizens who are going to be impacted. We don't have an option but to accelerate our low carbon transition as much as possible, so that our citizens are less and less impacted. Everything that India is proposing in international fora, whether it is LIFE, or it is tripling of renewable energy, or it is doubling of energy efficiency, or it's the need for finance, I think all of them going forward point to a fairly important position that India is trying to secure for itself, not only as a country with the biggest population, but also as a country with a lot of heft and soft power. And I think the climate challenge is quite intertwined with its own development challenge. Whether or not 2070 is real, I think the next 5 or 7 years will reveal that, and that will be the best judgment on how fast India can achieve its own targets. And mind you, these targets are also quite competitive in the way how the rest of the world is looking at net zero, what US is doing with its inflation reduction, what Europe is doing with its Green New Deal, and what China is doing. China is installing 200 gigawatts of just solar power in the last year. India's entire coal fleet is in that range. So, the big countries that we are competing against are quite big in that scale. The questions to ask are really, how much is it that our big chunks of sectoral emissions can be reduced in a way within the next couple of years, so that we have a competitive edge and we can actually both have the soft power to negotiate in a world which is unequal, as well as we are able to advance our own targets.
Smaller goals will probably help in achieving that big target that we have set. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time. But before I wrap up this discussion, a quick word from all my guests on what is the way forward and what needs to be the key focus for India in 2024. Starting with you, Mr. Harjeet Singh.
So it's very clear that India has to get more investments from abroad because right now most of the money that we are spending is domestic. So how we make those regulatory changes, how we make it more investment friendly, and the kind of incentives we can provide to individuals for changing their lifestyle, and also industry for more investments. At the same time, one more issue that we have to invest in is adaptation, which means that the way impacts are increasing, how we are going to make sure that our infrastructure is climate proof, how we are able to make our agriculture far more resilient to climate change impacts, and how we are going to make people far more aware of increasing climate impacts. So we have to reduce our emissions, but at the same time prepare the country for more climate impacts as temperatures have been rising.
Professor Anjal Prakash. Quickly, a word.
See, in the list of challenges that you have put it, I have not seen the institutional challenge that we face. I think the major problem that we face this moment is the service delivery at the grassroots level, at the local level. And that's where most of the problem lies. If you look at the way in which the ministry, which is in charge of the issues of climate change, is structured, there is the last person who is affected by climate change has nowhere to go. And that is where I have been saying that there has to be a strong institutional institutional reform for us to respond to the local needs, right from the state to the central and to the local level, especially at the sub-district level. Second point is about the scientific institutions coming forward and providing this information to the local administration, where the local level planning get induced into climate change level planning as well. And this is not happening. And I think these two things must be taken forward.
Right. Ulka?
So I would say that we have a season coming up of potentially heat waves, monsoon, other kinds of extreme events. I think the urban heat island effect is something that is always there in addition to climate change. So what we need to do really is to protect nature in our cities, protect our green spaces, protect our blue spaces, water bodies as much as possible. And in all of this, whatever actions we take, whether they are for green hydrogen or renewable energy or urban infrastructure or for adaptation to climate change, in any action that we take in the name of climate change, make special attention to the needs of the most vulnerable and the poorest and most marginalized communities. I will just be able to give 10
seconds to Aarti. Aarti, your point before we close this discussion.
I think I will say there are a slew of initiatives that are there, and the reality is in implementing them. If we can do science-based policy making, look at the way we have struggled with air pollution, and we still don't have answers. So just the political will and the ability to work on them, I think that's going to take us a long, long way.
Right. Thank you so much to all my guests for joining us for this very important discussion tonight. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have as of now. News and updates will, of course, continue on NDTV.